In part 3 of our series, Learn to Play Planet 28, we are going to discuss movement. To conduct movement, you can use the move action, and this can be executed over even terrain, rough terrain, hazardous terrain, and the climb action. And when you talk about climbing, you're of course going to have falling rules. There is also a charge action that involves moving your model, but that is closely associated with melee or hand-to-hand combat, and so we'll cover that in part 5 of our series where we cover that topic. Now in the game, every character can move 10 centimeters per move action. So I have my little fabric tape measure here because they're easy to get by airport security. Now when you think about moving 10 centimeters, there's a couple different ways we normally measure distance. So you can either take it from the center of the base, and so move from center to center, where the 10 centimeters would be. My preferred way is I take from the front leading edge of the base and move 10 to 10. Now, in games of Planet 28, you don't have a front or a rear for your model, so whenever you're making your move, you can turn, you can change directions, whatever you need to do. You just get 10 centimeters of movement. Now let's discuss some of the different type of terrain here. So according to the manual, as we mentioned before, there's even, rough, and hazardous terrain. So what I have demonstrated here are examples of even terrain. We have a flat, smooth area. This ladder back here would count as even terrain, and these staircases. So there is no penalty for moving along any of these surfaces. Now you can see here, to discuss rough terrain, I've changed the board state. So you can either use physical models to represent rough terrain, or as you can see on this board, there's a visual depiction of rubble right here. So rough terrain is rubble, flowing water, any obstacle less than 5 centimeters in height. So when you're trying to move across these, let's say I take my guy, he's on here and he tries to go through there. What happens is as soon as I hit the rough terrain right there, I'm going to make a skill roll against this model's agility. So remember, as we discussed before, I'll take my D10 and I'll make a skill check versus my agility. Now if the roll succeeds, he can move as normal. Now if it fails, he'll go half moves. So for what that means is, let's grab my ruler here. I say that this rubble strewn area is 5 centimeters. That means if I hit here and I fail my agility check, I get half move. So for every centimeter over the rough terrain I travel, I'm going to eat away at 2 centimeters of movement. So you can see if we started here and this is 5 centimeters, I failed my agility check. It's going to take my whole movement just to get over here. Now you could run into the situation of where you use up all your movement and you're in the middle of the rough terrain. That means when you start your next movement or go into the next turn and use a move action, what you're going to have to do is take another agility check to clear through to the other side. Now, agility also applies to any object under 5 centimeters, and 5 centimeters is key because that prevents you from treating, the standard. So the standard height on a 28 millimeter piece of terrain is 3 inches, and you'll find that's just around 8 centimeters. So it prevents him from just going, oh, this is rough terrain, and hopping over. So we'll take these obstacles as rough terrain, and you can say here, well, we'll treat that as 3 centimeters and move over. Now if you ever get stuck, like you burn through your movement, you're going to be on top there, and where everyone can see you. Now I pulled out this piece of terrain here, which I normally don't use on my Necromunda boards, but before you start a game, you really need to work with your opponent and define what is even, rough, or hazardous. And this is a good point to talk about that, because anything above 5 centimeters, you've got to make a climb check. You got to climb against it. So how do we treat these windows here? And that treats the fundamental question, can guys climb through the windows? Because if I say, well, he can squeeze through there, that's under 5 centimeters, it'd just be a rough terrain check. If I treat this window as solid, that's going to be a climb. So before you start a game, just work out with your opponent saying, even though the character's bases don't fit through these shattered windows, they can climb through them, so this will just be rough terrain. If they try to go over this part of the wall, that'll be a climb. The more you communicate before you start the game, the less arguments you'll have in the long run. Now we're going to discuss hazardous terrain. Now, the rulebook says things like razor wire, toxic sludge, spiked pits represent hazardous terrain. So you can see I've changed my terrain state, making it a little more complicated here with these bright green neon areas. Those will be my toxic sludge. But you can also reuse bits of terrain. Where before I just said this was rough terrain, I could say these are radioactive casks, whatever. Someone's storing some spent nuclear fuel, and so these might be hazardous. Now, hazardous terrain is the next step up from rough terrain. Now, when you try to traverse these areas, you're going to have to make an agility check. If you make the agility check, you get to treat the hazardous terrain as if it were a rough terrain. Now, you've got to make a skill roll for every action the character spends in rough terrain, so you might take a little while getting through this toxic spill there. Now, if you fail the skill check, you get to take D10 damage minus any armor rolls. That's to reflect how bad that area is. Now let's discuss the climbing rules. Now you're going to run into situations of where the obstacle in front of you is greater than 5 centimeters in height. If it is, we're going to have to use climbing. Now this can represent fences or walls. So, for example, something like this. Over 5 centimeters, he'd climb over. This also gives you the opportunity to mix tall areas with hazardous. So you can mix all these different terrain types together, because we could say this is electrified, this is barbed wire. So the Planet 28 gives you a rough idea of rules, so you can actually layer them on together. But when we're thinking about climbing, it's over 5 centimeters in height, so what our character is going to do is they're going to use their move action to get to here. Now, if he, for some reason, doesn't want to use the ladder or the stairs, he wants to climb, he's going to have to make an agility check. Now, if he succeeds at the agility check, he just uses his standard movement to climb up. Now, let's say that he runs out of movement, or he's got to do an especially tall climb. So we'll go something like that. Because you could see a situation of where he moves 7 centimeters, only has 3 centimeters left, and in his movement action, so he moves up. Now what's going to happen is, if he has another movement action, he's going to have to make another agility check and move another 10 centimeters. Now let's say he moves 7 centimeters, up 3, he moves another 10, but he's still short of getting to the top. If you run out of movement in a climb and there's no place to rest your model, you've got to make another agility check to show that the character has latched on and isn't going to fall. Now, if a character is in mid-climb, so for example, this character started the game, he uses his first action to climb here, he has to use his climb, he has to use his next action to get off of this prone position. He can't turn and say, "Ha, I'm going to shoot you," and shoot him. You can't be holding onto the side of a wall and start shooting. That would be cool, but it's not allowed in the rules. You've got to finish your movement to a stable area. Now, you can't have climbing rules and not have falling rules. So we've mentioned you've got to make multiple agility checks as your character climbs the side of a wall, a building, a tower, whatever, even that fence. So what happens if he fails any of those agility checks? He falls. Now, the outcome of falling is, let's say this guy hits this wall, he climbs up 5 centimeters. Now, if you fall from the height of 5 centimeters or less, you just set the character down. Nothing happens. However, for every centimeter above 5, the character falls, you set him here, and he takes 1 point of damage for every centimeter above 5. No bonus from armor. Alright? So a fall from 6 centimeters causes 1 point of damage, a fall from 7 centimeters causes 2 points, and so on and so on. So you can see that, a fall from this height, depending on how badly damaged your character is, could kill him. Thank you for joining us today at Miniature Wargaming Labs. Please join us for our next episode in our series Learn to Play Planet 28, where we'll discuss shooting.